My name is Bobbie, and at 58 years old, I thought I had seen it all. As a retired French teacher, I was excited to host a special dinner to finally meet my son Michael's fiancée. The table was set with our finest china, the wine was carefully selected, and my hopes were high. But as Camille walked through our door, something in her smile gave me pause. If only I had known what would unfold over dessert. If you're watching this from a multilingual family, drop a comment and let me know your experiences with language barriers. Now let me tell you what happened next. My son Michael has always been the light of my life. At 32, he's grown into a wonderful man with a successful career as a software engineer in Chicago. We've always been close, even when he moved away for his job 5 years ago. That's why I was so excited when he called to tell me he was engaged. "Mom, I met someone amazing," he had said, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Her name is Camille, and I think she's the one." Michael explained they had met at a tech conference just 8 months ago. According to him, it was love at first sight. They exchanged numbers, went out for coffee the next day, and had been inseparable ever since. The whirlwind romance surprised me a little, as Michael had always been cautious and methodical about everything, especially relationships. But I was happy for him. His excitement was contagious. "I can't wait for you to meet her," he told me. "She's smart, beautiful, and accomplished. You're going to love her." I shared the news with my husband Thomas, who was equally thrilled. Our son had been single for nearly 3 years after a difficult breakup, and we were relieved to hear the happiness in his voice again. "It's about time," Thomas said, smiling. "Our boy deserves someone special." I immediately began planning a dinner for when they would visit. I wanted everything to be perfect for this important first meeting. French has been a significant part of my life for over 40 years. I first fell in love with the language in high school, and that passion led me to study abroad in Paris for 3 years in my 20s. Those were some of the most formative years of my life, immersing myself in the culture, literature, and daily life of France. When I returned to the States, I knew I wanted to share that love with others, so I became a French teacher at Lakeside High School in our Minnesota town. For 30 years, I taught teenagers the beauty of French language and culture. Even after retirement 5 years ago, I maintained my fluency by joining a French book club that meets monthly and participating in online conversation groups twice a week. French isn't just a language I speak, it's a part of who I am. As the day of the dinner approached, I found myself growing more anxious. I wanted to make a good impression on the woman who would become my daughter-in-law. I spent days planning the perfect menu, settling on my signature beef bourguignon, fresh salad with homemade vinaigrette, and a classic chocolate mousse for dessert. Nothing too fancy, but dishes I had perfected over the years. My daughter Amanda came over early to help with preparations. At 30, she's a successful attorney with a practical outlook on life that sometimes borders on cynicism. 8 months seems really fast for an engagement, she commented while helping me chop vegetables. "Do we know anything about this Camille person?" "Your brother is a grown man who can make his own decisions." I replied, though privately, I shared some of her concerns. "Let's give her a chance before we judge." The truth was, Michael had shared surprisingly little about Camille's background during our phone calls. I knew she had grown up in Quebec and moved to the United States as a teenager. She worked in marketing for a luxury brand company and traveled frequently for work. But beyond those basic facts, she remained something of a mystery. "I just don't want to see him get hurt again," Amanda sighed. "Neither do I admitted. "But all we can do is support him and trust his judgment." Thomas spent the afternoon setting the table with our best china, the set we had inherited from my grandmother and only used for the most special occasions. He opened a bottle of expensive Bordeaux we had been saving for a momentous occasion, letting it breathe. "This is as good a reason as any," he said when I raised an eyebrow at his choice. "Meeting our future daughter-in-law doesn't happen every day." At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my dress, took a deep breath, and opened the door to meet the woman who would be joining our family. When I opened the door, my first impression of Camille was that she was strikingly beautiful. Tall and slender, with glossy dark hair and perfect makeup, she looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. She wore a sleek black dress that I could tell was designer, with subtle but expensive jewelry. Michael stood beside her, beaming with pride, his arm around her waist. "Mom." "Dad, this is Camille," he said, his face glowing with happiness. "Camille, these are my parents, Bobbie and Thomas." Camille flashed a brilliant smile that somehow didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's so nice to finally meet you both," she said, leaning in to air-kiss my cheeks in the European fashion. "Michael has told me so much about you." She handed me a gift bag containing an expensive bottle of French wine and a box of gourmet chocolates. "A small token of appreciation for hosting us," she explained. "How thoughtful," I said, genuinely impressed by the gesture. "Please come in and make yourself comfortable." We settled in the living room with glasses of sparkling water. Michael couldn't stop looking at Camille, his adoration obvious in every glance. It reminded me of how Thomas used to look at me when we were first dating, and I felt a surge of hope that maybe this whirlwind romance was the real thing after all. "So Camille," Thomas began, "Michael tells us you grew up in Quebec." "Yes, in Montreal," she replied. "My father was in international banking, so we moved to the States when I was 16 when he got transferred." "That must have been a difficult adjustment at that age," I commented, trying to find common ground. Camille shrugged delicately. "Not really. I attended an international school, so the transition was quite smooth." She glanced around our living room, her eyes lingering on the family photos and mementos we had collected over the years. "You have a very cozy home," she said in a tone that made me wonder if cozy was a euphemism for something less flattering. I noticed she checked her phone frequently, each time apologizing with a quick, "Sorry, work never stops in my industry." I tried another approach. "Michael mentioned you work in marketing for luxury brands. That sounds fascinating." "It is," she replied, but offered no further details, effectively closing that avenue of conversation. Thomas jumped in with one of his dad jokes, trying to ease the growing tension. "What do you call a fake noodle and impasta?" He chuckled at his own joke. Camille's smile seemed forced as she replied, "How amusing." I was relieved when Amanda arrived, apologizing for being late due to a work emergency. She greeted Camille with a warm handshake and immediately launched into a story about terrible traffic, momentarily diverting attention from the awkward atmosphere. "Dinner's ready," I announced, grateful for the chance to move things along. "Shall we head to the dining room?" I had spent hours setting the table with care, using my grandmother's lace tablecloth and our best china. Candles cast a warm glow over the table, and the aroma of beef bourguignon filled the air. I felt a flash of pride as we entered the dining room. "It smells wonderful, Mom," Michael said appreciatively. I watched Camille's face as she took in the spread. Was that a flicker of disappointment? Her expression was polite but unimpressed as she took her seat. "This is a family recipe," I explained as I served the food. "I learned it during my time in France." "Oh, you've been to France?" Camille asked, seeming genuinely surprised for the first time. Before I could answer, Michael jumped in. "Mom lived in Paris for 3 years in her 20s. She was a French teacher before she retired." "How nice," Camille replied, her interest already fading as she turned to whisper something to Michael that I couldn't quite catch. Thomas raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to the happy couple. To Michael and Camille, may your life together be filled with love, laughter, and adventure." "Hear, hear," Amanda and I echoed, raising our glasses. I noticed that Camille barely touched the food I had prepared, taking tiny bites and moving it around on her plate. Michael, on the other hand, ate with gusto, complimenting me between bites. As the meal progressed, I tried to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. Surely it was just nerves making our first meeting awkward. Things would improve as we got to know each other better. They had to. As we continued with dinner, the conversation became increasingly strained. I searched for safe topics, but each attempt seemed to hit a wall. "Have you two discussed wedding plans yet?" I asked, hoping this would be a subject Camille might want to elaborate on. Her face brightened for the first time that evening. "Actually, yes. We're thinking of a destination wedding in the French Riviera next spring. There's an exclusive resort in Nice that would be perfect." Michael looked surprised, as if this was the first he was hearing of it. "We're still exploring options," he added quickly. I thought of Thomas's brother, who used a wheelchair after a stroke last year, and my own mother, who at 82 wouldn't be able to manage such a long flight. "That sounds lovely, but I hope you'll consider something a bit closer to home as well. Some family members might find it difficult to travel that far." Camille's smile tightened. Well, we want our wedding to be special, not convenient. People who really care will make the effort. Thomas cleared his throat uncomfortably and changed the subject. Michael tells us your company is expanding into Asian markets. That must be exciting. This diversion worked temporarily, but the undercurrent of tension remained. Amanda asked about Camille's enormous diamond engagement ring, and Michael enthusiastically jumped in to tell the proposal story. I had it all planned, he said, grinning. I reserved a private dining room at Le Bernardin in New York, arranged for her favorite flowers, and had the ring hidden in a champagne glass. It was acceptable, Camille said with a small smile, though I had always imagined something more public, perhaps during a vacation in Santorini or Bali. I watched Michael's face fall slightly before he recovered. Maybe we can renew our vows in Bali for our 5th anniversary, he suggested. Trying to lighten the mood, I shared a story about Michael as a child, how he used to stage elaborate proposals to his kindergarten teacher with rings made of pipe cleaners. He's always been a romantic at heart, I concluded fondly. Camille looked bored throughout my story, checking her phone under the table. Moments later, her phone rang, and she excused herself to take the call in the hallway. As soon as she was out of earshot, Amanda turned to Michael. Seriously, the French Riviera. And did you see how she reacted to Mom's story? She's just nervous. Michael defended her quickly. Meeting your partner's family is stressful. She'll relax once she gets to know you all better. I wanted to believe him, but something felt off. Still, I was determined to give her the benefit of the doubt. First meetings can be awkward. Let's all try a little harder to make her feel welcome. Thomas nodded in agreement, always the peacemaker. Your mother's right. Let's focus on the positive. Camille returned immediately, reaching for the wine bottle and pouring herself another generous glass. Sorry about that. Work crisis averted. The conversation turned to honeymoon plans with Camille, describing an elaborate 3-week tour of Southeast Asia that would cost more than our first house. And what about holidays? I ventured carefully. We usually host Thanksgiving, and it would mean a lot to have you both here. Camille exchanged a glance with Michael before responding. We'll have to see. My family often spends holidays in Aspen, and I've promised my parents we'd join them this year. Perhaps we can alternate years. The implication that they might only visit us every other year stung, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course we understand. Family obligations on both sides can be tricky to navigate. As I served the main course, Camille offered what seemed like a compliment, but felt like anything but. This is surprisingly good for homemade food. I usually prefer dining out at Michelin-starred restaurants, but this is quite edible. I saw Amanda's knuckles turn white around her fork, and Thomas placed a calming hand on her arm under the table. Michael, either oblivious or willfully ignoring the tension, continued eating enthusiastically. I reminded myself that this was just one dinner, and relationships take time to build. But as I watched Camille's dismissive glances around our dining room and her barely concealed yawns during family stories, I couldn't help but worry about what kind of future daughter-in-law she would be. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come. About halfway through dinner, as I was serving the second course, Camille leaned toward Michael and whispered something in French. I probably wouldn't have paid much attention, except that I clearly heard the words maison de banlieue tacky suburban home. I froze momentarily, but decided not to react. Perhaps I had misheard, or maybe she didn't mean it negatively. I continued serving, watching them more carefully now. A few minutes later, Camille whispered in French again, this time more audibly. La nourriture est tellement médiocre. Comment peux-tu manger ça? The food is so mediocre. How can you eat this? I felt a stab of hurt. I had spent hours preparing this meal using recipes I had perfected over decades. Still, I remained silent, curious to see if this was just an isolated comment or something more. It wasn't long before Camille spoke French again, clearly assuming no one else at the table understood her. Ta mère s'habille comme une vieille dame démodée. Son style est tellement provincial. Your mother dresses like an outdated old lady. Her style is so provincial. Each comment felt like a slap, but I maintained my composure, sipping my wine and pretending I didn't understand a word. Michael looked slightly uncomfortable, but didn't stop her or let on that anything was amiss. The insults continued throughout the meal, growing bolder with each glass of wine Camille consumed. Ton père doit gagner si peu d'argent avec ce travail pathétique. Your father must earn so little money with that pathetic job. Ta sœur est tellement ordinaire et amère, pas étonnant qu'elle soit célibataire. Your sister is so plain and bitter. No wonder she's single. Then came comments that truly alarmed me. Après notre mariage, nous n'aurons pas besoin de les voir souvent. Une fois par an sera suffisant. After our marriage, we won't need to see them often. Once a year will be enough. I watched Michael's face carefully during these exchanges. He seemed increasingly uncomfortable, but said nothing to defend his family. Was he afraid of confronting her? Or worse, did he agree with her assessment of us? Then came the comment that made it impossible for me to maintain my silence. Franchement, je me marie avec toi pour ton potentiel de carrière. Une fois que tu seras plus réussi, nous pourrons enfin nous éloigner de ton pathétique milieu familial. Frankly, I'm marrying you for your career potential. Once you're more successful, we can finally distance ourselves from your pathetic family background. I gasped involuntarily and dropped my fork, the clatter against the plate drawing everyone's attention. The room fell silent as I looked directly at Camille, who was smiling smugly, completely unaware that her cover was blown. In that moment, I had to make a decision. Should I expose her true colors now and potentially damage Michael's relationship? Or should I continue to observe and perhaps speak to him privately later? As I deliberated, Camille made one final cutting remark in French. Ta famille est tellement inférieure à la mienne. J'ai hâte de te transformer en quelqu'un de mieux que tes origines. Your family is so inferior to mine. I can't wait to transform you into someone better than your origins. That was the final straw. I couldn't let this continue. My son deserved to know the person he was planning to marry. I looked directly at Camille and said in perfect French, Pourriez-vous me passer le sel, s'il vous plaît? Could you please pass me the salt? The table fell silent. Camille's face drained of color so dramatically it was as if someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Michael looked confused. Mom, you spoke French? I nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact with Camille. Oui, je parle français couramment depuis 40 ans. Yes, I've been fluent in French for 40 years. The realization of what had just happened dawned on Michael's face, followed quickly by concern. What did Camille say? He asked, looking between us. The moment of truth had arrived. I believe your fiancée has been quite candid with her opinions tonight, I said calmly, still in French, though perhaps not in the language she thought you would understand. Camille's shock quickly morphed into defensive anger. You've been eavesdropping on private conversations, she accused, switching to English. It's hardly eavesdropping when you're speaking at my dinner table, I replied, also switching to English so everyone could follow. And I'd hardly call insulting your hosts a private conversation. Michael looked between us, confusion giving way to concern. What exactly did she say, Mom? Amanda, sensing something significant was happening, leaned forward. Yeah, what did we miss? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Camille has expressed some strong opinions about our home, the food I prepared, and each of us personally. You're exaggerating, Camille cut in quickly. It was just nervous chatter. Your mother is misinterpreting casual comments. I looked directly at her. Calling our home tacky, my cooking mediocre, and referring to your father's career as pathetic doesn't leave much room for interpretation. Michael's face paled. You said that about my family. He turned to Camille, disbelief evident in his expression. Thomas, usually the most easygoing person in any room, sat up straighter. I think we deserve to hear exactly what was said. Camille's composure was crumbling. This is ridiculous. I might have made a few offhand remarks, but they're being blown completely out of proportion. Then you won't mind if I repeat them, I said firmly. In measured tones, I translated each of the comments she had made, watching Michael's face grow more troubled with each revelation. When I finished, Amanda let out a low whistle. Wow, and here I was trying to give you the benefit of the doubt. You don't understand, Camille said, her voice rising. I was just nervous and saying stupid things. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're anxious. including planning to distance Michael from his family after marriage?" I asked quietly. "Or stating that you're only marrying him for his career potential?" Michael's head snapped up. "You said that—" Camille stood abruptly. "This is absurd. I'm not going to sit here and be attacked." She grabbed her purse and turned to Michael. "We're leaving. Now." But Michael didn't move. "I need to know if what my mother is saying is true." "Of course it isn't," Camille insisted, but her eyes darted away from his. "She's twisting my words, trying to come between us because she's jealous of our relationship." I remained calm. "Michael, I've translated exactly what she said word for word. You know I wouldn't lie about something like this." A tense silence fell over the table as Michael looked between us, clearly torn. "Fine." Camille snapped her pleasant facade, completely gone now. "So I said some things. Your family is judging me and I was venting. Everyone vents." "Venting is one thing," Thomas said quietly. "Planning to isolate our son from his family is another." Camille's strategy shifted again, her eyes filling with tears. "I was just scared they wouldn't like me. Can't you understand how intimidating this is, meeting your family, wanting to make a good impression?" Michael stood up, his expression pained. "Let's talk about this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," Camille said coldly, her tears vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. "Either you trust me or you trust them. You can't have both." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and final. Michael looked at each of us, then back to Camille. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "but those things you said, if that's how you really feel about my family, then maybe we need to reconsider everything." Camille's face contorted with rage. "Are you serious? You're choosing them over me?" "I'm choosing respect," Michael replied quietly, "for my family and for myself." With a final glare at all of us, Camille stormed out, slamming the front door behind her. Michael didn't follow. We sat in stunned silence, the half-eaten dinner forgotten, as the echo of the slammed door faded away. The silence that fell over our dining room after Camille's dramatic exit was deafening. For several long moments, none of us moved or spoke. The candles flickered, casting strange shadows on our shocked faces. The beautiful dinner I had spent hours preparing lay half-eaten on our plates. Finally, Michael broke the silence with a deep, shuddering sigh. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea she felt that way about all of you." Amanda reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "It's not your fault, Mike." "But it is," he insisted, looking up with eyes full of shame. "There were warning signs, small comments here and there, the way she would roll her eyes when I talked about coming home for visits, how she always had an excuse for why you couldn't meet her sooner." He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "I just didn't want to see it." Thomas got up and went to the liquor cabinet, returning with a bottle of scotch and 4 glasses. "I think we could all use something stronger than wine right now," he said, pouring generous measures for each of us. "To honesty," he said, raising his glass, "however painful it might be." We drank in silence, the scotch burning a path down my throat. I felt terrible for my son, but also relieved that the truth had come to light before he made a terrible mistake. "I should have told you about her behavior earlier," Michael continued after a while. "She's been controlling, checking my phone, getting upset when I spent time with friends instead of her, criticizing my clothes, my job, my apartment. I thought it was because she cared, because she wanted the best for me." "Oh, honey," I said, my heart breaking for him. "She's been saying things about all of you from the beginning," he admitted. "Small digs at first, questions about why Dad never got a promotion to management, comments about how community college teaching isn't a real career." He glanced at me apologetically. "I defended you, I promise. But then she would say I was too attached to my family, that it wasn't normal for a grown man to be so close to his parents." Amanda shook her head in disgust. "Classic isolation tactic. I've seen it in domestic cases." "I just thought she was nervous about meeting you," Michael said. "That once she got to know you, she'd understand why I love you all so much." He looked down at his hands. "I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid," Thomas said firmly. "You were in love. It happens to the best of us." I wrestled with my own feelings of guilt. Had I done the right thing by exposing Camille's true nature? What if Michael had been happy with her despite her flaws? "I'm sorry if I overstepped," I said hesitantly. "Maybe I should have spoken to you privately instead of confronting her at the dinner table." "No, Mom," Michael said firmly. "You did exactly the right thing. I needed to see who she really is." He took another sip of scotch. "The woman I fell in love with doesn't exist. She was a performance the character Camille created to hook me." Later that night, after Amanda had gone home and Thomas had gone to bed, Michael and I sat on the porch swing like we used to when he was younger and needed to talk. "She called," he said, staring out into the darkness, "while I was helping Dad clear the table." "What did she say?" I asked gently. "That she was sorry if she offended anyone, but that her comments were taken out of context, that you deliberately mistranslated to make her look bad." He gave a humorless laugh. "Then she said if I really loved her, I'd leave with her tonight and we could still catch our flight back to Chicago." "And what did you tell her?" "That it's over." I returned the ring. His voice cracked slightly. 3 months of my salary gone just like that. But it's worth it to know the truth before we got married. I put my arm around his shoulders, this grown man who would always be my little boy. "I'm so sorry, Michael. I know how much you loved her." "I loved who I thought she was," he corrected me, "not who she really is." We sat in silence for a while, the old porch swing creaking gently. "The thing is," he said finally, "part of me already knew. There was always this gnawing feeling in my gut that something wasn't right, but I ignored it because I wanted so badly to believe I'd found the one." "That's how these people operate," I told him. "They know exactly what you want, and they become that person until they've got you hooked." The next morning, we all gathered for breakfast. Michael looked exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. "I called the jeweler this morning," he said, pouring coffee for everyone. "They have a 30-day return policy on engagement rings. I'm just within the window." "That's good news," Thomas said, passing the toast. "At least something positive came from this mess." Amanda arrived with bagels and a determined expression. "I've come to help pack up her things," she announced. "The sooner we get all traces of her out of your apartment, the better." Michael smiled weakly. "Thanks, sis." As they were preparing to head to Michael's hotel to collect Camille's belongings, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his face paled. "It's my bank," he said, answering the call. We watched as his expression shifted from confusion to shock to anger. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. "Camille made some purchases on my credit card last night," he said tightly. "Designer clothes, first-class tickets to Paris, and a week at a 5-star hotel, almost $20,000. "Can you dispute the charges?" Thomas asked. Michael nodded. "The bank flagged them as suspicious since they were so large. They've frozen the card and they'll investigate." He laughed bitterly. "Apparently she decided to treat herself to a consolation prize when I broke things off." "That's theft," Amanda said, her attorney instincts kicking in. "We should file a police report." Michael shook his head. "I just want her out of my life. The bank will handle the fraud investigation. I never want to see or speak to her again." As they left to deal with Camille's belongings, I couldn't help but feel that despite the pain and drama, Michael had narrowly escaped a lifetime of manipulation and control. Sometimes the most painful moments are also the most necessary. 6 months after the disastrous dinner that ended Michael's engagement, our family gathered again around the same dining table. This time, however, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. "To new beginnings," Michael said, raising his glass with a genuine smile that reached his eyes. It was a smile I hadn't seen in a long time, not even during his relationship with Camille. The months following that fateful night hadn't been easy. Michael had gone through all the stages of grief for his relationship. There had been anger when he discovered more of Camille's deceptions, including secret credit card debt she had accumulated in his name. There had been depression when he packed up and moved to a new apartment, unable to stay in the space they had shared. There had been denial when he briefly wondered if he had overreacted, if perhaps he should have given her another chance. But ultimately there had been acceptance and growth. Michael had thrown himself into his work, earning a promotion that he attributed partly to no longer having someone undermining his confidence at home. He had reconnected with old friends whom Camille had subtly pushed out of his life. And most importantly, our family bonds had strengthened through the crisis. "I never thought I'd say this," Michael admitted one evening during our new tradition of monthly family dinners. But that horrible night was actually a gift. It showed me what real love isn't, which helps me recognize what it is. For my part, I had spent considerable time reflecting on my own actions that night. Had I been right to expose Camille so publicly? Should I have found a gentler way to let Michael know about her true character? I eventually joined a support group for parents of adult children in difficult relationships, where I found that many others had faced similar dilemmas. "You followed your instincts to protect your son," my friend Eleanor from the group told me, "and you gave him the information he needed to make his own choice. That's not interference, that's love." I began sharing my experience with others in the group, especially those whose children were involved with controlling or manipulative partners. Sometimes I explained the kindest thing we can do is to hold up a mirror to reality, even when the reflection is painful. Thomas and I celebrated our 35th wedding anniversary that summer, and Michael gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes. "Watching you two all these years gave me the blueprint for what a real partnership looks like," he said. "It's because I grew up seeing genuine love and respect that I knew deep down something wasn't right with Camille. Thank you for showing me what to look for, even if it took me a while to see it clearly." Michael had started dating again cautiously. The new woman in his life, Julia, was a pediatric nurse he had met through a volunteer program building playgrounds in underserved neighborhoods. When he brought her to dinner for the first time, I was careful not to compare her to Camille or to judge too quickly. Julia was different in every way. She asked thoughtful questions about our family photos, genuinely complimented the meal I prepared, and most tellingly, her warm laugh and kind eyes matched the person she presented herself to be. There was no performance, no calculated charm, just an authentic person connecting with our family. "What do you think?" Michael asked me privately after Julia's first visit. "I think she seems lovely," I said honestly. "But what matters is how she treats you when no one else is watching." He nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind my words. "She builds me up, Mom. She doesn't tear me down. That's the difference." The unexpected gift of that terrible dinner was the deeper understanding it gave all of us about authentic relationships. Michael learned to trust his instincts and to require respect, not just for himself, but for the people he loves. Amanda became less cynical, seeing how her brother had faced heartbreak and emerged stronger. Thomas and I were reminded of how precious our family bonds are and how important it is to protect them. As we sat around the table 6 months after the night that changed everything, I looked at my family with profound gratitude. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives prevent even greater pain down the road. Sometimes a difficult truth spoken aloud is the most loving gift we can give. "I have something to share," Michael said, setting down his glass. "I've been offered a position in the Minnesota office. I'm moving back home." The joy that filled the room in that moment washed away any lingering doubts I had about my role in ending his engagement. My son was coming home not because he was running away from failure, but because he was moving toward what truly mattered to him. That night, as Thomas and I got ready for bed, he put his arms around me and said, "You know, in 40 years of knowing you, I've never been more proud of you than I was that night when you spoke up." I leaned into his embrace. "I was just trying to protect our son." "And you did," he assured me. "Some mothers would have stayed silent to keep the peace. You chose truth, even knowing it might temporarily break his heart." As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about the strange connection between language and love, how the French I had studied for pleasure had become an unexpected tool for protecting my family, how sometimes the most important phrases we can speak are not the pretty ones, but the honest ones. And I realized that sometimes the worst dinners really do make the best stories. Has anyone in your family ever caught someone speaking about them in another language they didn't think you understood? Or have you ever had to make a difficult choice between honesty and keeping the peace? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share with someone who might need a reminder that speaking truth is sometimes the greatest act of love. Thank you for listening, and remember that family bonds, when built on honesty and respect, can withstand any storm.